Leon just changed the sister wives' story forever, and what they revealed about their childhood could make you see the Brown family completely differently. So subscribe now, because the next part gets even more shocking. The conversation around the Brown family has taken another unexpected turn, because Leon has now spoken publicly about their childhood and described the religious environment they grew up in as a cult, and that one statement has opened a much bigger discussion than anyone may have expected, because once a family has spent years on television presenting its life to millions of viewers, every old scene can suddenly look different when one of the children begins explaining how they experienced that same life from the inside. Leon has described growing up with 4 parents, living in a plural family structure, spending much of childhood around church activities, being homeschooled, and later attending religious schooling. And according to Leon, the religious environment became increasingly intense as they got older, with frequent time spent at church, religious classes, devotional activities, and expectations surrounding behavior, clothing, and social life. And this is where the story becomes complicated, because viewers are now being asked to look back at the Brown family not simply as a television family, but as a family whose children may have experienced the same environment in very different ways. Leon has also spoken about being shy and fearful as a child, and about not knowing many people outside that religious community before the family moved and entered a different stage of their lives. And that raises a question that has followed the family for years: what exactly happened when the Browns moved away from the environment they had known and began living a much more public life in Las Vegas? Because from the outside, the move looked like the beginning of a new chapter, but perhaps it also represented a major shift in how the children understood the world around them. And that question becomes even more interesting when we remember that the family was simultaneously becoming a reality television phenomenon. Suddenly, private family beliefs, family disagreements, parenting decisions, marriages, and relationships were no longer happening entirely behind closed doors, and every season gave viewers another piece of the puzzle. While Leon has now described their childhood through their own perspective, other family members have also spoken publicly about difficult aspects of growing up in a plural household, which means there is no single explanation that can capture every child's experience. And that distinction matters, because saying that someone experienced their upbringing as restrictive or difficult does not mean every member of the family experienced it in exactly the same way. And it is important to separate personal testimony from assumptions about what happened behind the scenes. What makes the discussion especially compelling is the contrast between the public image of the Brown family and the private experiences being described today. For years, viewers watched the family attempt to show that plural marriage could function like any other family structure, and the early seasons often focused on the practical challenges of sharing a husband, raising children, and maintaining relationships across multiple households. But as the years passed, the family structure changed dramatically. Relationships became strained, children grew older and began forming their own opinions, and the original idea of one unified family became much harder to maintain. And now Leon speaking about their childhood adds another layer to that evolution, because viewers are left wondering whether the family was gradually leaving behind an old religious system, or whether some of the same dynamics simply continued in a different form. That does not mean the Brown family should automatically be labeled as a cult today, and it would be irresponsible to present speculation as established fact, but it does create a fascinating question about how family beliefs influence children, and what happens when those children grow up and begin deciding for themselves what they want to keep and what they want to leave behind. Another important part of Leon's story involves identity and personal expression, because Leon has also spoken openly about being trans and has shared how yoga became an important part of their life, and how movement helped them feel connected to themselves, their body, and the world around them. Whatever individual viewers may think about the way Leon communicates these ideas, the underlying message is clear. Leon is trying to describe a process of becoming comfortable with their identity after growing up in an environment they now view very differently, and that personal journey deserves to be discussed carefully without turning it into a target for ridicule or reducing an entire person to one part of their identity. At the same time, public figures who share their stories online naturally create conversations among viewers, and that is exactly what is happening here, because once someone who grew up on television starts explaining their childhood through their own adult perspective, audiences begin comparing those statements with what they remember seeing on screen, and that comparison can be uncomfortable, because reality television only shows selected moments, and viewers never had access to every conversation, every disagreement, or every private feeling inside the family. There is also a broader question about religious upbringing itself, because many people grow up in strict religious communities and later decide to remain religious while others leave and describe their childhood differently. Neither experience automatically invalidates the other, and the Brown family story demonstrates why personal history can be complicated. A child may remember warmth, friendship, family traditions, and meaningful relationships while also remembering rules, pressure, or expectations that felt difficult, and both memories can exist at the same time. That is why the biggest question is not simply whether the Browns were or were not part of a cult. The bigger question is what happens when children raised inside a highly structured belief system grow up and finally have the freedom to decide what those beliefs mean to them. And that question leads directly back to Leon, because this story is clearly not finished, and if Leon continues sharing memories from childhood, viewers may begin hearing details that change how earlier seasons are understood, and that possibility is exactly what keeps people watching, because the most revealing part may not be what has already been said, but what could still be explained later. And just when viewers think the conversation is only about Leon, another Brown family member enters the picture, and the entire story starts moving in a different direction. And that brings us to the rest of the family, because while Leon is discussing childhood identity and the religious environment they remember, other members of the Brown family are creating completely different lives, and those differences may be the clearest sign of how far everyone has moved from the original family structure. Christine has built a new chapter with David and frequently shares moments from their life together, including travel, work, and everyday experiences that show a very different kind of relationship from the one viewers watched for years. Janelle, meanwhile, has been focused on her farm project, and recent updates have shown that the journey has been far more complicated than simply planting flowers and starting a new business. Plans that sounded straightforward have involved permits, engineering, environmental reviews, emails, phone calls, delays, and plenty of waiting. And now the project is finally moving forward, with planting and work taking place on the property. And that may seem like a small update, but symbolically it represents something much larger. Janelle is building something that belongs to her, and that independence has become one of the strongest themes surrounding her life after the plural family relationship changed. Meanwhile, Mary has been noticeably quieter online, and that silence has naturally caused viewers to wonder what she is doing, whether she is working on something privately, or whether her reduced activity could have anything to do with filming for another season. But without confirmation, those questions remain speculation, and that distinction is important, because social media silence does not automatically mean something dramatic is happening behind the scenes. The same applies to rumors about the next season of Sister Wives. Viewers are already trying to predict when the show will return and what material could appear, but until the network confirms the schedule, there is no reason to treat predictions as facts. What we do know is that the family continues to attract enormous attention, because every new post can become part of a much larger conversation, and that is especially true when the adults and children who once appeared together on television now speak about their lives separately. McKelty and Tony have also continued creating their own online content and discussing subjects connected to their family history and religious background, which adds another layer to the conversation, because multiple family members are now telling their stories from different perspectives, and those stories will not necessarily match perfectly. That is actually what makes the situation so interesting, because families rarely remember the same childhood in exactly the same way. Two siblings can live under the same roof and walk away with completely different memories. One person may remember community and structure, while another remembers pressure and restriction. One may see the family television experience as an opportunity. The story does not end with Leon, because once one member of a famous family begins speaking openly about their childhood, the attention naturally turns toward everyone else. And that is exactly where the Brown family becomes even more complicated, because every sibling appears to have taken a different path after growing up inside the same household. And while Leon has been reflecting on religion, identity, and childhood experiences, other members of the family have built lives that look almost completely different from the world viewers knew during the early seasons of Sister Wives, and that contrast is impossible to ignore. Christine has openly embraced a new chapter of her life, and her relationship with David has become one of the clearest examples of how dramatically things can change after leaving a long-term relationship. Instead of continuing to live inside the old family structure, she now appears focused on her marriage, travel, work, and the life she is building outside of Cody. While Janelle has taken another route and continues putting energy into her farm project where progress has been slower than expected, but where she appears determined to keep moving forward. What makes the farm story interesting is that the delays have reportedly involved permits, engineering, environmental reviews, and other practical challenges that can turn even a simple-looking project into a long process. But now the work is beginning to move, and that gives Janelle something she has wanted for a long time, a project that belongs to her and represents a future that is not dependent on the old family arrangement. And then there is Mary, whose online presence has become noticeably quieter, and whenever Mary becomes less visible, fans immediately begin asking what is happening behind the scenes. But silence does not automatically mean trouble, and it is possible that some of the activity simply has not been shared publicly, or that filming and personal life are keeping her attention elsewhere. And this uncertainty is exactly why viewers continue watching, because with this family, even a quiet period can create questions that eventually lead to a much bigger conversation. Another important part of the story is McKelty, who has also become increasingly comfortable discussing the family history and sharing her own perspective through online content and conversations with her husband Tony. And this creates an unusual situation because viewers are now hearing multiple versions of the same childhood from different members of the family, and those perspectives do not always line up perfectly. But that does not necessarily mean someone is lying. Families are complicated, and siblings can experience the same household in completely different ways. One child may remember a strict rule, while another remembers a supportive moment. One may focus on the pressure, while another remembers the friendships and opportunities. And those differences become even more noticeable when the family has been filmed for years, because the audience already has memories of these people from childhood and adulthood. And now those same people are explaining what viewers could never see through the cameras. And that is where the conversation about religion becomes much more interesting, because the real question is not simply whether a particular religious community should be labeled one thing or another. The more useful question is how much influence a belief system has over a person's choices, and what happens when that influence begins to change as children become adults. Leon has described feeling disconnected from much of the world outside their community during childhood, and later discovering different forms of self-expression and personal connection. And that kind of transition can take years, especially when someone has grown up with strong expectations surrounding family, religion, behavior, and identity. And the public nature of the Brown family makes that process even more difficult, because every change happens in front of an audience, and every statement can be analyzed by people who have never met the family personally. That is why this story should not be reduced to simple heroes and villains. The reality is far more complicated, and the most responsible way to discuss it is to focus on what family members have actually said, while recognizing that their experiences are personal and may not represent everyone in the family. And yet there is one detail that continues to make the story fascinating. The Brown family once entered television with the goal of showing viewers that their unusual family structure could work. But over the years, the family itself transformed. Relationships ended, children moved away, new marriages formed, and individual identities became stronger. And the family that once seemed united around one shared belief system now appears to be a collection of adults building separate futures. And perhaps that was inevitable, because children eventually grow up and begin asking questions of their own. And when those questions become stronger than the rules they were raised with, the entire family dynamic can change without anyone planning it. And this is where the next chapter could become even more revealing, because Leon is not the only person with memories of that childhood. And if more family members decide to speak about what they experienced, viewers could begin hearing details that were never part of the television narrative before, and that could